The temperature is dropping in the Cold War between the US and China. President Biden again criticizing Beijing for what America calls a genocide against its Muslim Uyghur people. He's threatening repercussions. China strongly denies these accusations. In a hyper-partisan US, standing up to China appears to be one of the few points of consensus. But what's next as the superpowers face off? Well, joining me now is the former Iowa Governor Terry Branstad. Until last October, he was also President Trump's ambassador to China. But when he was first governor back in 1985, Branstad met Xi Jinping, who was on a tour of rural America as a young Communist Party official. And now the former governor is joining me from Des Moines, Iowa. Welcome back to the program. Let me talk to you first as the former ambassador to China. You know, we are in this situation where almost every day, it seems, the US and China, indeed the EU and China, are coming up at loggerheads against each other. There seems to be kind of an inability to figure out a modus vivendi. What do you think you were able to achieve under the Trump administration with regards to that relationship?
Well, Christiane, first of all, it's great to be on your program, and it was a great honor to be the American ambassador to China. It was a difficult and challenging job because China is a strategic rival of the United States. And as you pointed out, there have been a number of abuses of human rights against the Uyghurs, against the people in Hong Kong, in Tibet, and many other areas. So that's a problem. And I'm pleased to see the Biden administration recognizes that as something, and the Congress, on basically almost a unanimous vote, passed sanctions against some of the people that have been responsible for the mistreatment of the Uyghurs and also the mistreatment of the people in Hong Kong.
So let me ask you, because now you mentioned President Biden, and he has come out after a town hall with CNN saying that there will be repercussions. This is a little bit of what he said last night, and I want to get your reaction to it.
Well, there will be repercussions for China, and he knows that. What I'm doing is making clear that we, in fact, are going to continue to reassert our role as spokespersons for human rights at the UN and other agencies that have an impact on their attitude. China is trying very hard to become the world leader. And to get that moniker and to be able to do that, they have to gain the confidence of other countries. And as long as they're engaged in activity that is contrary to basic human rights, it's going to be hard for them to do that.
So, Ambassador, he also went on to say, I can't talk about such a complicated matter in 10 minutes on TV. And of course, we have to work with China on the COVID pandemic, on climate and other such things. After, several years of being there representing the United States and seeing Xi Jinping, close up, where do you think are the points of leverage? What can the United States do to a China that doesn't seem to care about what the rest of the world thinks?
Well, one of the things that the Congress already did was sanction some of the people involved in mistreatment of the Uyghurs and in Hong Kong. But you know what China normally does is they retaliate. And so I think 10 minutes after Biden was sworn in, they basically retaliated with sanctions against 28 people that had been in the previous administration. And, when we closed their consulate in Houston, they retaliated by requiring us to close our consulate in Chengdu. Basically, we're trying to get to a situation where China recognizes they need to play by the same rules as everybody else, and we want to see fairness and reciprocity in the relationship, something they never had before, but we started that during the time that I was ambassador. I'm pleased to see that President Biden is at least talking a good game, but it's a challenge, and it's important that we work with China when we can, but we also need to stand up to the inappropriate actions they've taken, like in the South China Sea or the mistreatment of the Uyghurs and the people in Hong Kong and the squeeze they're putting on Taiwan.
You know, again, China, because it has no pretensions anymore, it's not like standing back. It wants to be the superpower. It wants to have the influence in that region and perhaps potentially take over the US role as number one in the world. So I just wonder whether whether it's a fool's errand to actually think you can change their behavior. And particularly, I want to know what you think. Were relations, after the Trump administration better than when you left or before? Because it's really in a chill, and people have called it like sort of, almost like a Cold War atmosphere.
Well, first of all, I think we need to recognize that China wants to be rich, powerful, and respected. And the point that I tried to make is they can't be respected if they don't live by the same rules as everybody else. And they haven't been doing that with their abuses of human rights, with the inappropriate actions they've taken in the South China Sea, which is international water. So we have had American ships, freedom of navigation, transportation going through that area consistently, and that needs to continue to demonstrate that those are international waters, and there are a dozen or more smaller countries in Southeast Asia who also have rights to that area, as does the rest of the world.
We've mentioned several times, and you really are in a unique position because you really, you got to know Xi as a young Communist Party official back in 1985 when he came to the United States, and you were in your first term as governor of Iowa. I want to know what kind of a relationship you built with him back then. I realize it was, it's not exactly a best friendship, but nonetheless, you had a unique opportunity given who he is today. And what you made of him then, what kind of characteristics did you perceive in him then?
Well, in 1983, I signed a sister state with the Hebei region of China, and Governor Zhang Zhiguang from Hebei came to Des Moines and signed that agreement. He invited me to bring a delegation to Hebei in '84. I did that, and we were very well received. China was very different in those days. People were still wearing the Mao uniforms. We rode an old steam locomotive, coal-fired steam locomotive, to Zhuang, but they treated us very well. My wife was given a big bouquet of flowers. They had a band that met us there. We were there for the 35th anniversary of the founding of the People's Republic. So then in the spring of '85, we had a small delegation of 5 young men led by a county level party leader, a party secretary named Xi Jinping. They came to Iowa. His business card said, Feed Association of Zhuang. We treated them very well. There's a picture taken behind my desk in the governor's office on April 29th. And they visited farms and factories, and we treated them so well that when I came back as governor after a 12-year sabbatical in 2011, he had then become the vice president of China, and we had a 45-minute meeting in the Great Hall of the People, and he had his itinerary from that '85 trip, and he talked glowingly about how well he'd been treated in Iowa, and he called all the people that he met during that time old friends. So, and when my wife and I and our daughter and son-in-law and 2 grandchildren came to China, and I became the ambassador, my daughter teaches at the International School of Beijing, he invited us to have a private dinner with he and his wife, and actually his daughter joined us for that as well. So the personal relationship was good. The thing that's been disappointing is the direction that China has taken under his leadership has been more giving the Communist Party more and more control. And instead of opening up and becoming more democratic, it's gone the other direction.
I just wanted to ask you whether you were surprised by that and whether you had thought when you met him those years ago that he was maybe a reformer or what. Because, as you know, President Trump also had a decent relationship with him. And, you know, he kind of jokingly said, or maybe not so jokingly, that he wished he could also have, you know, leadership in perpetuity as Xi had you know, given himself. And we don't know when, if ever, Xi is going to leave. The New York Times has basically said that, and others, foreign policy experts, the relationship between the US and China today, after 4 years of Trump, have never been worse since the 1949 Communist Party revolution. So are you surprised, and do you think that Xi will just simply continue with very little opposition around the world to consolidate basically his power and become the #1 superpower?
Well, we were hopeful that he'd be a reformer like his father and like Deng Xiaoping, who really started the reform and opening policy in China. Unfortunately, after Xi Jinping became the supreme leader of China, and he's got 3 titles. He's the commander-in-chief of the People's Liberation Army, he is the general secretary of the Communist Party, and he is the president of China. Now, the president of China is the weakest of the 3 titles. And that's the only one that had term limits. And of course, as you said, that's been eliminated. So he is in his second 5-year term, and he is not prevented from going on beyond that. I think he wants to make China great again. They felt that they had 100 years of humiliation and until the communists took over in 1949. But there's been a lot of ups and downs in our relationship over the years. And in fact, I would not call this nearly as bad as it was before President Nixon went to China and began the opening up process. But the thing that's been disappointing, we helped them get into the WTO, and we've done a lot to invest and help China become a much more prosperous nation. They've gone from being a third world country to now being the second largest economic power in the world, and their economic and political and military power continues to grow. We need to recognize they are a strategic competitor, and America needs to protect our interests, and we also need to stand up for human rights of other people, especially the people that have been mistreated, like the Uyghurs and the people in Hong Kong.
Okay, so Governor, let me ask you to put your governor and your senior Republican Party hat back on and ask you, what do you think China makes of President Trump basically disregarding the democratic process in the United States itself, leading to that terrible insurrection on January 6th, and even tonight has gone on the air to once again deny that he lost the election, to once again baselessly say that it was stolen? First of all, your reaction to that, because he said it just now. And secondly, what do Xi Jinping and the others think? Do they think, oh, well, the United States is not somebody we have to take seriously when they talk to us about democratic principles?
Well, China loves to absolutely downgrade the United States and say negative things about the United States. They even continue to say that the Wuhan virus, which has become a worldwide pandemic, came from American soldiers that came to Wuhan, or it came from Europe. So they've lost a lot of credibility with their propaganda and their wolf warrior approach around the world. I think it's important that the Republicans recognize that we need to work on and focus on policies that are good for America. And I'm proud to say that I never lost an election. I was elected governor 6 times, served longer than anybody else. And I've helped build a party in this state and working to support Republicans around the country. We now have 60% of the legislatures. We have 27 of the governors. We have, I think, gained 12 seats in the Congress in this last election. And I think we need to continue to focus on policy and reinsert the Ronald Reagan 11th commandment about speaking no ill of other Republicans. So that's my goal. Is
Well,
to
that
try
would
to
be
help
great.
the party in that way.
That would be
We're doing
great
it
if
in
it was
Iowa.
possible, but there's full-scale civil war, it seems, war within the Republican Party. Trump has also, in the last 24 hours, literally given the back of his hand to Mitch McConnell, the Senate former majority leader, now the minority leader, calling him dour, talking about his double chin, saying he was out of step, and saying that if anybody was being supported by Mitch McConnell in future elections, Trump would go out and support the opponents. I guess I want to ask you, if you don't want to speak evil about anybody in the Republican Party, do you still support Donald Trump? Do you support him when he says that the election was stolen and that he actually won? And do you support any movement that makes Trump the leader of the Republican Party, given what's happened?
Well, I have always been very welcoming. I welcome Xi Jinping to Iowa. I welcome presidential candidates of both parties as governor. And I want to keep the Iowa caucuses first in the nation. And so we're already looking at people that might want to come here and run in 2014, and they're all welcome. We want them to come early and often and get to know the people of Iowa. Iowans take their responsibility very seriously, and I'm very proud of what we've been able to accomplish. And I want to work on restoring civility and encouraging people to focus on issues instead of attacking each other. And I really think it's time to restore Ronald Reagan's 11th commandment. I think that has served us well.
Okay.
And I want to be a leader that works to bring people together and to reduce taxes and regulations and make this country the kind of leader that we want to be. And we think that our alternative to what China offers is something that has appeal, and the transparency and openness of our system is so much better.
Mm-hmm. I need to ask you, Governor, basically, I've been, from your perspective as a former ambassador and seeing what the rest of the world looks at the United States for, I spoke to the former Prime Minister of Australia, and this is what she said, and it was really interesting, about January 6th and how America might want to look at it. Just listen.
What would the United States be using its voice in the world for if this had happened in another nation and there had been incitement, there had been a riot, there had been the potential for, there were deaths and the potential for even more violence and deaths? What would they be saying about accountability? What would they expect that nation to do? And if you think about it like that, in some ways, I think the question answers itself.
I think she put it pretty well. So my final question to you is this. Do you believe that the election was stolen from Donald Trump, as he continues to say?
Well, first of all, we all condemn the violence, and the good news is we did have a successful transition. The vice president and the people in the Congress did their job, and we are a great country, and this was a terrible tragedy, and we want to make sure that something like this never happens again in this country. And I know, regardless of people's political persuasions, they condemn it and want to make sure that we continue to respect our political system in this country. And I would point out, Iowa is the first in the nation, and Iowans take their responsibility very seriously. We want to keep the Iowa caucuses first in the nation, and we want everybody that wants to be a future leader in America to come to Iowa and meet the great people and have an opportunity to continue this great political system that we're so proud of in America.
Okay, so Governor, I'm a little disappointed because I asked you a direct question. You're a senior Republican Party leader. You talk about Iowa, which is a major, frontline election state. And you won't tell me whether you think the election was fairly won by Joe Biden.
Well, first of all, the election is over. Joe Biden is the president. I accept that. I think, first of all, that we want to look to the future, and we want to focus on what can be done in the midterm elections and then the next election, and that's what we've always done. And I'm very proud to say that I have been the one that has accepted and invited people to come here, and we want to continue to do that.
Okay. All right, well, that's a non-answer, but I do have to move on. We have some great guests coming up. Thank you for your time, Governor Branstad. So we're going to zoom in now on trauma, on grief.